Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day. Microphone check, 1, 2. CC, hello and welcome. CC, hello and welcome.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. There we go, rolling.
Most people know you probably need a release signed by anybody you interview or anybody you film for your project. But there's so much more to it than that. And having the legal ducks in a row is really not that hard as long as you have the materials and the awareness that it needs to be done.
Hello and welcome to The Documentary Life, a show that sets out to inspire and inform you on how to best live and lead your own documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 39. And it is brought to you by Barong Films, proud creators of documentary film, the Documentary Life podcast, and the Documentary Academy, our industry-changing A to Z documentary filmmaking program that will transform you into the documentary filmmaker that you've always wanted to be. Find out more at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. It's been 2 weeks now since Steph and I attended Podcast Movement 2017 in Anaheim, California. And yet somehow it already feels like it's been ages ago. It's probably due to the fact that we've just come off of a 3-day weekend here in the U.S. The kids, they've only recently started daycare. In fact, this week, it's only the second week that we've even been in our new house. Our new house, by the way, barely has any furniture in it yet. So yeah, a lot has been happening in a very short time span. So the luster and glow of our time in California at the podcast industry conference, it's long since worn off. But what hasn't worn off is the excitement and inspiration and desire that I have for producing this show weekly. What I learned from my time at Podcast Movement, it stayed with me in large part due to the feelings that I have about my time there and the many really fantastic and like-minded people that I met in the various breakout sessions, the workshops, and keynote speeches. I also talked a bit about this in the opening of last week's episode, the importance of being around like-minded people who share your own passions, have a deeper understanding of your own, your shared interests, and quite frankly, speak the same language as you. I drew parallels between what I felt being around the podcasting community and what you and I feel very much here on the show as documentary brothers and sisters, or doc lifers, as I like to refer to us. So when we come back from a quick break, I'd like to delve into this a little bit further. I'd like to talk with you about the importance of attending documentary live events, i.e., workshops, screenings, conferences, and film festivals, and how you might best get involved with some of these. Again, I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and as always, thanks for tuning into The Documentary Life. I'm going to ask of you something that I don't think I've asked of you for well over a year. I need a favor. I need you to go to iTunes right now and give this show a 5-star rating and maybe even write a few words for a review. When I first started doing the podcast, I was asking you this on a regular basis. You might remember it was like the first 3 or 4 episodes. It's clearly been a while since then. So I'm asking you now because I'd like to see this podcast get out to more people. That can happen if the Documentary Life comes up in more iTunes searches. In order for this to occur, iTunes basically needs to see more activity in what's known as its ratings and reviews section. The more ratings and reviews a show gets, the more it'll come up in searches. So, for when people are searching for documentary film podcasts, we're far more likely to come up in their searches if iTunes is seeing more of this activity. You know this show is a passion of mine, so please help me keep growing this documentary community of ours. If the documentary life has benefited you in any way, please take a moment right now, head to iTunes, search for the Documentary Life podcast, look for the ratings and reviews tab, and then leave us a 5-star rating and review. I can promise you that every single one of these ratings and reviews gives it a little bump in the iTunes popularity rating, thereby, again, increasing the visibility of the show. If you do have any trouble finding the ratings and reviews area, I've added a direct link to it in the show notes for this episode. In advance, thank you for helping me to continue spreading the Documentary Life love. So why would one attend a live event that has something to do with documentary film or documentary filmmaking? That may seem like a ridiculous question, but let's think about it for a second. When was the last time that you went to a documentary film festival or a documentary filmmaking workshop? Did you attend any this year? If so, good for you. You're already ahead of the game. But for the majority of us doc lifers, attending a live event isn't always the obvious thing to do. Why is that? Probably because we're too damn busy making our own documentary films. Why? Makes sense, right? I've often talked about how, if we're not careful, living the doc life can be a pretty solitary one. The nature of documentary often lends itself to this. In essence, you as the filmmaker, you get an idea. You start to research this idea. You research the subject. Maybe you talk to a few people. You grab some gear, and you're off. And next thing you know, you're conducting interviews. You're manning the camera, putting up a light or two, running sound yourself. You know the score. It's all familiar, right? It's all too familiar. You're doing the whole thing yourself. Any of you who works in commercials or TV or features knows that it's a bit different from that. It's not a solitary situation. If for no other reason, then you have to put yourself out there so that, people know who you are. They remember you. You stay connected so that you can really, you get the next gig, you get the next job. It's the nature of the business, so to speak. Not to mention on commercials and features, you have obviously bigger budgets, bigger than we doc filmmakers tend to work with. So that means you can afford to hire out crew members. Working with crew is not a solitary thing. It quickly becomes a pretty social event in some ways. I believe that by extension, by being a documentary filmmaker, sometimes we have a tendency to forego the various, documentary events, if you will, that are out there for us to get involved with. We stay to ourselves and to our films. I have met many a doc filmmaker, who may have had a little more than a slight social anxiety issue. Believe me, myself included. It's my wife who's constantly pushing me to get out there and meet people, go to some of these events. Hell, to even have people over to our house for dinner, if I'm being honest. So again, why is it that we should be attending live events? Well, think about what I've mentioned in the last 2 openings of our podcasts. I've talked about how inspired and excited I was after attending Podcast Movement, after being around these other like-minded individuals who, we all shared a similar passion. Well, in fact, our doc industry guest that we'll have on the show later today, I actually met him at the conference. He's an entertainment lawyer who specializes in media. He deals in legal issues with documentary filmmakers all the time. But I just happened to have met him at one of the breakout sessions at Podcast Movement. Coincidence that I would meet someone whom could be a guest on the show about documentary filmmaking? Sure, maybe. But even if I hadn't met someone, who'd be great for the show, I was meeting all kinds of people all of the time, every other minute, who have already helped me with my podcast career, if you will. Think of it this way. Think about the last time you were at, any kind of a social event, say a night out with friends at the pub, a family reunion, or a dinner gathering at someone's house. And someone asks you about you and maybe what you do, and maybe one of the things that you mention is that you're making a documentary film or you're a documentary filmmaker. And suddenly you see this person's face light up, right? You know the look. It's one of recognition, familiarity. It's even relief. and they quickly blurt out, "Hey, I'm a documentary filmmaker too." And the next thing you know, the rest of the time at this social gathering, it's spent engaging with this other person. I'm sure it's happened to you. It's happened to all of us at some point. No, it doesn't happen all the time, certainly. It's, I don't know, far easier to meet someone and have a conversation about politics or sports. It's probably more uncommon to meet a doc filmmaker at some random social gathering, but it does happen. What's important to remember here is the feeling that you had upon meeting that person. What emotions did this bring up? I'll bet it felt pretty good, and I'll bet it probably got you fired up to be working on your own film. Now, many of you are probably thinking, well, hey, I'm a part of some cool documentary communities on Facebook. I tweet pretty regularly with some doc filmmakers. Heck, I listen to the Documentary Life podcast. Doesn't the use of social media and engaging with online communities like this, doesn't it count for something? And I would say, yes, definitely. Of course it does. To a degree, it's important and helpful to be sharing ideas and networking with people in any way that we can. I would agree with that. I could pretty easily do a segment on social media in the documentary community, but I still think that there's immense value in meeting people, one-on-one or face-to-face. Attending live events to see how people make films, hear how people live their documentary lives, feel the overall energy of others who are doing what you're doing, right? Think of it kind of like think of it kind of like online dating. There's only so far, that an online profile and email correspondence is going to get you. At some point, hopefully sooner than later, you're going to have to meet this other person in order to see if you're going to get on, right? By attending live events, you're allowing yourself an opportunity to meet maybe your next investor, a potential future mentor, that person who can help you with, that animation sequence you've been wanting to put into your film, or that grant writing advisor who can share some insight into the grant writing process. I could go on and on. You never know who you're going to meet in everyday life. Like, it does happen that you can meet another doc filmmaker at a party, right? But imagine the increase in odds if you go to a place where there's a room full of them. Now, there are many ways in which one can attend this idea of a live documentary event. Going to a documentary film festival, that seems like the obvious one, right? That being said, please don't automatically assume that means you need to book your next airplane tickets for Salt Lake City or Cannes. I'm not sure I'd even recommend going to Sundance or Cannes, to be honest, unless you're looking for, people watching, a nice spectacle to observe. Yeah, of course, you are likely to meet other filmmakers there, and that's good, just as long as you're not, hoping to hang out with Morgan Spurlock or Errol Morris, or, get your big break by meeting up with somebody there that has a name or a distributor or something. You might get to talk with Morgan Spurlock a bit. In fact, I met him briefly back before Super Size Me was in the theaters, and he was a really sweet guy. He was super accessible, but it's important to remember that these people, they're there to exhibit and show their films, right? Maybe meet with a distributor or three. They're not there to necessarily meet you and talk about your really great documentary film idea, right? I've found much better success meeting like-minded people with similar interests and needs by going to the smaller venues, the smaller festivals. Surely there are documentary film festivals, within 100 miles from where you live at this point. It's an easy Google search away. We had on Film Fest director Lyndon Stone and doc film directors Richard Wiley and Costa Boats a way back. Hey, Costa, if you're still listening to TDL, how are you, mate? We had them on back in July. Lyndon runs the MDFF, the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. Richard and Costa both had films at MDFF, and in Costa's case, he attended the festival, as well as he gave a documentary filmmaking masterclass. And from everything that I've heard, this festival was a very accessible one for filmmakers like you and I. You could have walked up to any one of these guys, from what I understand, and introduced yourself and maybe asked for a little guidance with your own project. More than that, you would have had an opportunity to meet other doc filmmakers who were also in attendance. You would have been able to share ideas, challenges, recommendations, basically anything documentary related. And you would have had dozens, maybe hundreds of people who would have not only lent a sympathetic ear, but might have been, very likely been able to point you in the direction of someone who might be able to assist you with some element of your film. Workshops are another great way to meet other doc filmmakers, as well as expand upon your documentary filmmaking knowledge and skill set. It's amazing what sitting in on even a half-day workshop on, say, fundraising for your film, what it can do. All of those fundraising books that you've read and websites you've scoured, hours and hours and weeks of research on the best way in which to write your grant or throw a fundraising party, right? And then suddenly after 4 hours in this half-day workshop, you realize that, all of this information that you've gained amounts to more than the last year you've spent researching on your own. This is usually because of the class participation that's encouraged in these types of settings. Very personal stories are shared. Voices get to be heard, right? All of them directly related to, in this case, in this example, I'm using, say fundraising for documentary films. At Podcast Movement, I went to an hour and a half, what they called a master class, and it was really back-to-back sessions. It really just ended up being about hearing about everyone's podcast and then openly discussing what might help each person's podcast out. Effectively, there were about, think about 10 people, in this circle, and that were participating in this session, right? Super intimate. And each of us was given 10 minutes to talk about our podcast, and then really what our greatest need or needs were for the podcast. As we went around the room and everyone's introducing their podcasts and explaining what their needs are, then everybody has time to give feedback to it, within that 10-minute segment that each of us is allotted. Let me tell you, it was practically like this podcasting therapy session for each of us. I learned more in that, that open and honest session than I did for some of the more, intensive 50-minute sessions that were actually talks, led by other podcasting experts. Imagine just sitting in a room for a mere hour and a half, right, with 10 other documentary filmmakers. Each of you gets 10 minutes to talk about your film, introduce it, and then tell us about your greatest concerns, or needs with the project. Then you get to receive feedback from 9 other people. I bet that it would be the most intensive 10 minutes you'd probably ever spent discussing your film. Think of how uplifting and useful, that hour and a half would be for all of the filmmakers. You'd be listening to other doc filmmakers talk about their films and their own challenges with it. And you'd probably be sitting there, writing down half of the things that were said, because you too would also be able to, put to use many of these suggestions and recommendations. I'm telling you, documentary film therapy, people. Maybe I should put something together for a handful of us, actually. And that's what we'll call it. We'll call it Doc Lifer Therapy or something. That's actually not a bad idea at all. I could, I don't know. I guess I could open up a session on that Zoom platform. Do you guys know about Zoom? It's actually pretty awesome. It's I've only been experimenting with it, lately, as recommended by a few friends. It's basically this live video conference application. It's great though. I realize you can do this with other similar websites and platforms like Facebook or Skype, but I really like what Zoom has to offer. Unlike those other platforms, video conferencing is Zoom's sole purpose. Anyhow, should we do this? You know what? You want to take an hour and a half sometime and meet a handful of other doc lifers? I could sort of, lead the thing, MC the thing, if you will, and we'd go around the room, right, and meet everyone and talk about our films, and then maybe what our greatest need or needs are for it. I could probably get something like this up and running in the next month. Yes? Would you be into that? Let me know. Let me look into this a little bit, and I'll get back with you. In fact, tell you what, probably the first people that I would let know of available spots for something like this little documentary support group, if you will be those of you who are already on the Doc Lifer weekly newsletter. If you're not already, a part of this email group, you can always go to the Documentary Life website and sign up for the weekly email there. Yeah, cool. That would be awesome. I'd actually been thinking about doing something video conferencing with you guys for a little while now. And now as I'm sort of fleshing this out with you, this seems like a perfect application for it. It sounds like it would be great. Another great event you can attend as a documentary filmmaker is a retreat that's specifically tailored for documentary filmmakers. These are usually long weekend, sort of getaways in a scenic place where you basically live and breathe nothing but, the fresh air and documentary filmmaking. I know that Oregon has a pretty nice one called Oregon Doc Camp. This past year, it took place I've never actually attended it myself, but I have long wanted to. But I've heard great things about it. This past year, it took place I think it was late May for 3 or 4 days in, this beautiful rustic setting of Silver Falls, Oregon. I think that only about 40, 45 or so doc filmmakers can attend at any given time. You do have to apply to get into it, and there is a price, of course, and that basically includes food, lodging, and all of the workshops. And those workshops are generally led by some higher profile but very accessible doc filmmakers. And many of these types of settings, you're strongly encouraged to bring your own documentary film, maybe a rough or fine cut of it, with you when you go to the retreat. That's actually part of the deal. You're all sharing your films and attending the workshops together. I think in the case of Oregon Doc Camp, there are moderated panel discussions, with the invited guest speakers. There's some smaller scale roundtable sessions, maybe not unlike the masterclass that I referred to earlier at Podcast Movement. Informal work in progress screenings, right? Pitch sessions with the presenters, and really an array of technical demonstrations by some various camera and film TV production sponsors of the retreat. I know that TFI, Tribeca Film Institute, puts one on with the Camden International Film Festival as well. I don't know much about this one. I know a bit less, but I've also heard some pretty good things. What I do know is there are five U.S.-based documentary filmmaking teams that attend a 5-day retreat in Camden or Rockport, Maine. There's a series of mentoring sessions and workshops and other classes led by established industry people. I don't know. Have any of you attended any of these sorts of things? I'd love to hear more about it. That would be actually super helpful to hear more about that. In fact, maybe I should have someone from the Camden TFI retreat or Oregon Doc Camp, come on the show and talk about these retreats. Probably not a bad idea, actually. I'd also dig hearing more about retreats that are happening overseas. No, certainly not just U.S. based. Some international documentary filmmaking retreats, if you will. I've been dreaming about, putting together something like that, for a long time. I mean, wouldn't it be pretty cool to meet up in Nepal or Bali or Amsterdam or New Zealand? See, I got New Zealand in there, Costa, somewhere, and just have a week of mentoring and workshops and film sharing and doc life sharing. Hey, you never know, people. These things are all possible, right? These things are all possible. Man, just talking about all this meeting up and sharing with other doc filmmakers, it just gets me all inspired to get out there and be meeting and talking and networking with some of you guys. Got to find a way to make that happen. Got to find a way. Anyhow, I hope that this helped give you some idea of the live event possibilities that are out there for us doc filmmakers, and really why they're a great thing for us to be doing, hopefully even on a consistent basis. It's now time for the Doc Lifer Community Question of the Week. This week's email is from Michael. He says, "Hi Chris, I'm working on a documentary called For Your Grandchildren, which is partially about Standing Rock and the Sabal Trail pipeline fight." I hope I pronounced Sabal correctly. I find myself in the Houston area filming. There are a lot of pieces to the story I'm trying to tell. I have hit a crossroads of the film and really could use some guidance. You can see the trailer here, and Michael provides a YouTube link, which of course I watched. He continues, "I was actually arrested during the process of filming. I have found myself immersed in a world of people who are fighting to protect the planet. Thank you for constantly inspiring me with the podcast. I have listened to most episodes, and it's part of what keeps me going with the project." Michael, thank you for your email, man. And thank you for sharing a little bit of your own documentary story. I did, of course, watch the trailer for Your Grandchildren. Some very alarming images there, of course. Though sadly, these weren't exactly unfamiliar images to anyone who had followed the events in North Dakota, the North Dakota Access Pipeline situation last year. You might remember that we'd had on filmmakers Lindsay Grazel and Dea Schlossberg on the show a while back discussing their arrests during the time of filming. It sounds like you may have run into some trouble yourself. So first of all, man, thank you for fighting the good fight. It sounds like you got involved in a project that's taken you to places you never imagined. And you've probably found yourself swept up in a story and a cause that maybe previously to this you'd had no connection to. Good for you, and really good for all of us. So is the way of our documentary lives, right? Now, you mentioned that you've hit a crossroads of sorts, and that maybe you're looking for some guidance. I honestly, I'm not entirely sure what you're looking for. I couldn't help but wonder even if perhaps part of your email didn't get sent. It looked like it may have been truncated. Not sure, but just throw that out there. But if you have something specific that you were hoping for, specific that you wanted to ask me or could use some help with, please, do email me again. Either way, I'll try and point you in the right direction, or I can mention it here on an upcoming podcast. Also, you mentioned Houston. Of course, anyone in the U.S. is well aware of the travesty that's taken place down in that part of Texas. The hurricane was absolutely devastating. It's still devastating. I mentioned it in last week's Doc Lifer Community Question of the Week. You might remember a fellow Doc Lifer was reaching out to anyone who might be filming in the Houston area. He was looking to possibly add a video component to his thesis work. In any case, did you mention this in your email because you wanted me, to be put in contact with him? If so, please do let me know. And that also goes for any Doc Lifers out there who might be planning on doing some shooting down there, in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. Again, thank you for your email, Michael. If you do get a moment, please, drop me a follow-up email with some details about how I might better help you. If you yourself have a comment, question, or suggestion for the show, you can email me at chris@barangfilms.com. That's chris@barangfilms.com. And you too could be, highlighted on the next Doc Lifer Community Question of the Week. When we come back from a short break, we'll be talking with entertainment lawyer Gordon Firemark about all things legal that a documentary filmmaker should be aware of when making his or her film. After I premiered my first documentary film, Journey to Kathmandu, a film that took nearly 5 years to make, I remember feeling elated and exhausted. Is there any other feeling like the first time you show your completed doc film to an audience? I don't think there is. Not long after, I took a well-deserved short break away from the city, and it was while I was on a hike when I had reached a mountaintop and was overlooking the Great Columbia River that I found myself thinking back on the film and the journey that I'd been on. I thought about all the mistakes I'd made, all the wins that I'd had, how it had felt to finally share my film with an audience, and I thought about the life it would have from here on out. And I began to break down all the components of what had gotten me to where I was at that moment, and all the things I wished I'd done differently. And this is how I began to form what I am sharing with you today, a free course entitled The Documentary Filmmaker's Essential Checklist. In the Essential Checklist, I share with you the fundamental aspects of making a documentary film, and perhaps most importantly, help you to avoid making some of the mistakes that I made during my first feature film. It is my sincere hope that the Documentary Filmmaker's Essential Checklist will help make your doc film's journey the truly exhilarating experience that it can and should be. It's yours simply by going to thedocumentarylife.com/courses and enrolling for free. Mr. Gordon Firemark, how are you, sir?
I'm excellent. How about yourself?
Hey, I'm doing very well. Welcome to the Documentary Life. It's been, now a couple of weeks since we bumped into one another?
Yeah.
I think that might be a good way to start here, is just to explain how that happened, because it's actually really cool and crazy how that happened. And I talked about this on last week's episode, both Steph and I attending Podcast Movement and running into you, Gordon, at Podcast Movement. It was in one of the breakout sessions, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I think. Was it the one I was running, the Q&A? The mastermind.
It was it might have been at the mastermind, which would make sense because I think it was one of the back-to-back sessions.
Right. That's right.
And for our listeners, Gordon and I did not know one another prior to this, though I knew of Gordon, and it wasn't until I saw Gordon's name tag and he introduced himself during the session that I thought, I know that name, Gordon Firemark. And sure enough, we were in the session, and I quickly kind of Googled Gordon, and I thought, sure enough, we have a mutual friend in Faith Fuller of Desktop Documentaries.
I'm relieved it wasn't because you saw my picture on the post office wall.
Oh, maybe I didn't know about that.
No, I'm kidding.
How did you find Podcast Movement? How was that for you?
It was great. This year each year it gets better and better. This was the third year I'd been there. I missed the first one because I had opted for New Media Expo that year.
You did, okay.
Just didn't have it in the budget to do both. But this is the third year for me, and I was, I always try to speak at these things when I can. I have something to say about the legal aspects of podcasting, and so that was my reason for being. Right. Not my reason for being there. It was my justification for being there.
Totally. And you said it's the third year you've been there?
Yeah. And the panels and the breakout sessions and things are all fantastic, but really the value of these things is just going and meeting people, and I won't call it purely social because there's an agenda behind it, but it is so rewarding to meet like-minded people and have a chance to sort of talk the business of the thing, in this case podcasting.
Yeah, then that's such a apt way to put that. I actually talked about that in my opening segment last week, in last week's episode. I spoke about this idea of what it was like to be around a group of like-minded people who were passionate in doing the thing I do, which is, in part is podcasting. And I really equated it to my audience of documentary filmmakers and the networking that we do here, and being around the documentary brothers and sisters. Are
there similar conferences like that for the documentary community?
Yes and no. I think, Gordon, more of what it is the documentary film festivals where people will network and meet one another. It's more of that, though I myself, I'm hopeful to change that a little bit. I'm in the midst of putting together some workshops and courses, certainly spurred on by the inspiration of a couple of weeks ago, and so I'm hopeful to be doing that as well.
I think that same model would lend itself very well to, in particular, the documentary film community, but any film community really could benefit. And I'm here if you need some help. So.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And along those lines, Gordon, I know of you as an entertainment lawyer. And of course, you were at the conference, you were at Podcast Movement, essentially as a podcast lawyer, if you will. Would you consider yourself an entertainment lawyer still, or tell me about that?
I consider myself a media and entertainment lawyer.
Thank you.
And podcasting is a medium, just like film is a medium. And the only medium I don't really get involved in very much is music, the recorded music industry, because I did it early in my career, and it's a very, very intense.
Yeah, right.
And film has really always been sort of a love of mine, and both feature and documentary style. I myself have an undergrad degree in film production, and that's sort of how I got interested in that. But the legal stuff has always sort of captured my spirit as well. So this is my way of combining those things. But when I became a podcaster, I went looking and realized, hey, there's nobody out there who has put together the information about the legal aspects of podcasting.
Totally.
So I wrote a book and have been making the rounds talking about that stuff ever since. And so it's a little subset of my practice. Most podcasters don't have a lot of financial resources, so
right.
I don't make a living being a podcast lawyer. But when there's a conference and something, it's what I go and talk about. I want to help these folks stay out of trouble and protect themselves from other people stealing stuff and using things without permission.
Gordon, you spoke of an interest in film, and in fact, your undergrad was in film production. How did the entertainment law, how did it evolve into that?
So I'm going to give you my whole origin story, since so when I was in the kindergarten. So 5 years old, I'm in the kindergarten at a school that was K through 12. This was back in Brookline, Massachusetts. And the high school kids were doing a production of Oliver, and the kindergarten kids were brought in to a rehearsal, and we sat down, and the lights went down, and the curtain went up, and the stage lights came on, and I had tunnel vision. I was focused and intensely interested in that for the whole time. You don't see a 5-year-old sit still for 2 hours straight very often.
Yeah, right.
Mesmerized. And went home, and Mom, Dad, I want to see more plays and take me to see shows. And so they did. They were theater lovers themselves. And so that was my introduction to the entertainment industry, basically. And I did that all through junior high school, and actually worked professionally in theater starting around age 16. And
you have a great voice, I would think, for theater. It makes sense.
I was always behind the scenes. I was always a backstage sound and lighting.
Really? Okay.
Stage crew, yeah. But as a sound guy, you sometimes have to talk into a microphone and make an announcement or those.
Absolutely, yeah. The voice of God.
Yeah. So off to college I go to study theater, and it's a theater program mainly designed for the actors. Right. Performance intensive theater. Everybody had to work on the crew, but everybody was expected to be in the shows, and that just wasn't going to be my thing. I knew I didn't want to act. I didn't want to be on stage that way.
Okay.
So I shifted over to radio, television, and film.
Right.
At the school I was at, it was called Telecommunications and Film, and we had sort of a dual track program with the production on one side and the policy management and social stuff on the other side. And I was doing great in both. And by the end of my junior year, I had sort of wrapped up the major and still had some other requirements to get done. So I started taking the graduate level courses in this, which was government regulation of the media and media policy and management issues and stuff like that. And I did great in those classes.
And did those speak to you, those subjects, or did you just happen to do well in them?
Well, I did well in them probably because they spoke to me, or at least they triggered something in me that made me stay interested. So the professor of those classes actually pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey, if you haven't thought about law school, you should."
Wow.
And I laughed and thought that was the most ridiculous thing ever. I was applying to film schools, right? I was going to go to graduate school, trying to get into USC.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the LSAT was coming up. That's the admission test for lawyers. And I decided, okay, why not? I'll go take the LSAT. And I took it, and I did okay. And so I sent off a few applications to law school at the same time. And I got into law school. I didn't get into film school.
Wow. The universe spoke, my friend.
Kind of, yeah. And so I decided not to do either. And I took I graduated, and I came back here to LA where I grew up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Started working in television production. I really wanted to be in the film business, not the TV side. But, I was working in TV doing mostly live sports coverage. I was a line producer. I had a truck and a crew, and we would go out and do 3 events a week. And I was pretty good at it. It was very stressful, intense, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to be in the entertainment feature side. Okay. And just as I was ready to make a move, the Writers Guild went on strike.
Yes.
And that was going to be happening in Hollywood for a while. So that's when I reapplied and went to law school.
Wow.
Come to law school with a degree in, a law degree with a background in entertainment like that. And let's face it, nobody's hiring you to do insurance law.
Yes, right. What does it mean for someone like yourself when you describe the work that you do as an entertainment lawyer?
The work of an entertainment lawyer, as I said, it isn't really that sexy. It is a lot of paperwork, a lot of contracts. I mean, the contracts I deal with are interesting subject matter, and people are getting together to make a movie or co-write a script or finance a play or something like that. And really what it comes down to is who's going to own things and how are they going to share in the revenues and the profit. Nothing that extraordinary. Two businesses come together to make a joint venture. You get the same issues.
Right.
But it's copyright, and copyright law is different than most other kinds of property law.
Yes.
And then we have the personal rights of people with their right of privacy and right of publicity and all the kinds of things that go into the making of a film that you don't think about when you're manufacturing widgets. So it's my job to sort of help the people who are doing this kind of work understand the parameters and the boundaries and make sure they've got all their T's crossed and I's dotted.
Tell us about your connection to the documentary community through your work.
Well, look, making a film is making a film. And in a lot of ways, whether it's a narrative thing or a documentary style project, the Many of the legal issues are the same. Obviously,
Yeah.
the financing is different because the budget sizes are usually very different. But ultimately, it's, you've got a group of people coming together to jointly create something in a collaborative way. Usually generally more people involved in a feature than a documentary.
Right.
Um, yeah, so, over the course of my 25 and a half years of practice, I have represented people on both sides of that divide, the narrative
Interesting.
line. So, the documentary filmmakers come in and it's low budget and it's let's hurry up and do it fast.
Yeah.
And they'll generally need to have sort of a basic structure set up and some forms. And usually, often as not, the documentary comes to me after the film is either finished or nearly finished. And it's time for distribution, and the distributor is telling, here are all the things you need to give us.
Yes.
And they realize, okay, I've got the film negative.
Yes, right.
Paperwork in order. And so sometimes it's assembling things sort of after the fact. What I prefer to do, of course, is be brought in at the beginning,
Right.
Sometimes before anything but an idea is in place. And so we can get everything lined up so that what we call the chain of title of ownership is very clear. So from the inception of the project, we have a clean line traceable through paperwork to show distributors, hey, nobody else owns any part of this, and we've got all the rights and permissions we need, and music and all the other stuff in there is cleared, and we're good to go.
Well, that's actually perfect for this particular episode, Gordon. I don't know if you know how the documentary life works, but generally the first half of it is a segment that's entirely run by myself. So a particular given topic that I talk about for the first half of the show. And it just so happens to be that in this particular show, a lot of what I'm talking about is what are the things that that one can be doing in an organizational sense, in a production sense, in a visualization sense. What are the things that a doc filmmaker can be doing before they actually start making their doc films? Because as you are alluding to, oftentimes we run into issues long after the fact, and then we're trying to play catch up because of that. So maybe what you can do, we could couch a bit of this conversation now around your advice. What can doc filmmakers be doing in a legal sense before they're knee deep into their film?
Yeah, I would say step one is don't be afraid to have a consultation with someone like myself, an entertainment media lawyer who is sort of familiar with the issues and can run down this checklist. And we'll do a little bit of that now. I don't actually have my actual checklist right in front of me, but I'll do it from memory. But, you want to go down the checklist so that so that someone is asking you the right questions early enough that you'll kind of know what you need to be doing as you move through the process. I mean, most people know you probably need a release signed by anybody you interview for your show or anybody you film for your project. But there's so much more to it than that, and having the legal ducks in a row is really not that hard as long as you have the materials and the awareness that it needs to be done. So, sort of step one in my view is figure out who's the owner of this thing. You're a filmmaker, you think, okay, I'm the owner, but now you've got a bunch of people sort of coming in with other parts of the project. Maybe you don't own the camera, maybe you do, and someone else is running the camera. What about the sound guy? What about the sometimes the subject of the show? Let's say you're doing I had a client a few years ago who did a documentary about a very famous songwriter. Well, the songwriter thought that he was going to be the owner of the film.
Oh boy, right.
It was sort of a autobiographical thing. And so we ended up having to work that out. And it wasn't a big problem, but it was something that nobody had thought of until after a lot of shooting had been done. So a lot of it is also just sort of getting those things out in the open and having those conversations before there are misunderstandings that are costly. So having some kind of an entity structure, whether it's a corporation or a limited liability company, or maybe it's just a collaboration agreement or some kind of a partnership between the people putting the thing together, that clearly outlines who owns what and how they're going to divide things.
And I'm going to interrupt you there real quick, Gordon, because it rings a bell, and this is something that I myself have been faced with, and I know other doc filmmakers have. What are we doing when we're filming a particular subject? And by subject, maybe we mean a person's life, or maybe we're filming an athlete, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have a great story, and we've done, tens, if not hundreds of hours of footage with this person through the course of a half a year. And then at some point, ESPN gets wind of the story, and suddenly they come in and they want to do a documentary about this particular athlete. Not that we can necessarily stop them from doing that, but what can we as doc filmmakers do to protect ourselves when we come across a great subject and a great story, so that somebody can't just come in and say, you know what, hey, we're ESPN, we're going to tell that story now.
Yeah, there isn't that much you can do generally. And if you can get the subject, the person, to sign a contract of exclusivity, that's the object. That's what you want to do, so that they're not going to cooperate with the ESPN, for a period of time.
That's right.
To get your thing up. But that's a pretty hard thing to get them to do.
It is.
So that next best thing you can do is just get them to agree and cooperate and promise not to interfere with your production. And of course to give you the rights to do your thing. And hopefully if you've gotten fairly far down the path, you can do it faster, better than the second entrant. Not always possible, and
that's for sure.
ESPN is not in the same business as a documentary filmmaker. They do documentary style work, but it's generally for their channel, and it's a fairly limited exhibition schedule and things like that. A documentary film will probably have a longer life tail. So I wouldn't view it as competition so much as validation that there's interest.
Well, and what we're up against, you mentioned that you could potentially get that subject to draw up a contract with you and basically allow you the exclusive rights to their story.
Sure.
And then that's where you get into that weird sort of issue that can come up with the documentary filmmaker and then the subject, because the subject then says, well, if you're going to have exclusive rights to my story, that's my story. So then I'm going to need a cut of that. And that becomes that becomes that murky area, because we as doc filmmakers, are telling a story, and we may not have a budget ourselves. And the fact that you pay someone, even however you may pay someone, regardless, you are affecting that story. You are affecting the documentary process. And trying to get that subject to understand that is a very difficult task.
That's true. I mean, I do think that there's nothing wrong with paying people for the services that they render, if an athlete has a day rate for giving media appearances, then why not pay them their day rate if they ask for it, just like you would pay the sound person or the editor or the caterer to show up and do their job. That said, you don't want to be essentially buying the access to the person.
Yeah, right.
And although, let's face it, in the narrative world, we pay people for their life rights all the time.
Absolutely.
And it's just a slightly different business model. You're right. You don't want to corrupt the storytelling.
That's just it, right.
What is it? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, the mere act of observing something changes it? Well,
that's right.
Paying someone for the permission to observe them is definitely going to change it.
It's definitely affecting the story. Exactly.
So, so that's the thing. But again, I don't think that's necessarily anything wrong. I think it makes sense to sort of disclose the fact that they got paid, something. Certainly if there's a commercial element to things, then you have to disclose your commercial relationships.
Yes.
That's something we talk about with podcasters in particular. So, and likewise, I think if you're making a documentary and you receive some sponsorship, you should say so. If you receive goods in exchange for, exposure of, the product placement, for example, it should be made clear somewhere that there was a promotional consideration being made.
Like NPR might do, underwritten by so and so.
Well, yeah, and underwriting is actually a specific thing. But let's say Red Bull delivers 20 cases of Red Bull to you, so the cast and crew can drink it as long as they drink it on screen as well.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Then somewhere in the credits you should say, promotional consideration from Red Bull, just to make it clear that this was sort of a quid pro quo kind of a transaction.
Right. An issue that we often come up against, Gordon, as documentary filmmakers, is this idea of fair use and fair use and copyright law, and it's something I'm sure that you're more than well acquainted with as an entertainment lawyer. How often is that coming up for you with doc filmmakers?
Always. You know, so for those who aren't that familiar, let me back up and give a very brief explanation. So anytime you use content, you know, original material that was created by somebody else, that somebody else owns that material, and if you use it without their permission, that essentially amounts to copyright infringement, unless it qualifies as fair use. And fair use is this defense to copyright infringement claims that is a product of it's now in the statute in the Copyright Act since 1976, but this originated earlier under the 1909 Copyright Act. Judges had to sort of balance the rights protected by copyright, and the restriction on copying is in fact a restriction on speech. And here in the U.S. we've got, you know, free speech under the First Amendment. So those two things are in inherent conflict. So the judges came up with this approach called fair use that said, look, if you take certain amounts of certain kinds of material and use it in certain ways, then it will be considered free speech, fair use, not infringement. And then Congress sort of took that and codified the law, made it a part of the actual text of the law. And so what we do is we look at four independent factors when we have an alleged infringement. So let's say you've taken a little piece of music or footage of a film or painting or something like that. We have to examine these four factors, and we do this there's no rule of thumb. We have to do this analysis on each individual case on an ad hoc basis. So factor number one is the nature of the alleged infringing use, the purpose and character of that use. So if it's educational or newsy versus, you know, purely entertainment or very commercial, you know, that's going to impact the analysis. The second factor we look at is the amount and substantiality of what's taken. And what's often a misconception is, well, we can use 7 seconds of this, or we can use 3 bars of music or something like that. And there is no such rule of thumb.
So there's no sort of hards or rule of thumb. Okay.
Because those 3 bars may be the most substantial portion of the song.
Indeed.
For example. I mean, if I do dun 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 dun, that's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 notes of a song, but you know the song immediately. And if it wasn't Beethoven from way back, it would be protected by copyright. Yes. So you know, the amount and substantiality is that factor. The third factor is the nature of the original work. If it's similar to the new one, it's more likely to be deemed an infringement than if it's very different. If they're sort of transforming into a new medium or new thing, that helps on the fair use analysis. And the fourth one is the impact on the market for the original. If there's a licensing structure available, then the infringement may really look like just this is just a way around the licensing. We should have paid for it. That's going to be against a fair use conclusion. So the judge or jury has to make a determination of all 4 of these factors and weigh and balance all 4 and find out, does it come out as fair use or does it still look like infringement? And so that's what fair use is. And it comes up more so with documentaries than with other, because of the budget sizes and the availability of resources. But look, if you want to use a famous piece of music, you can expect that someone's going to complain about it, unless you've gotten a license, or if you're only using a tiny little smidgen of it to illustrate an important point. You know, documentary film tends to do well on that first factor, the nature of the alleged infringing use, the purpose and character. So you take a small amount and you do it in a transformative way. You're not selling records. You're not selling music videos. You're doing something, you know.
Or how if it's incidental. So you're filming in an area and there happens to be a piece of music that's in the background.
But even that, don't be so sure, because background music is still music in the film, and if it's the whole song, it's and it sort of plays a role in the film. And it's going to be different than if it's just we're doing an interview and we got this guy saying 6 words, and it happens that the band on stage in the back of the room was warming up playing, My Sharona or whatever.
Right.
I don't know why I chose that one.
Because it's a great tune.
There you go. So, that's why it has to be an analysis done on each little bit individually. And that is where, if you have a film that has lots of that kind of stuff in it, you're going to end up having to have a lawyer give you that analysis and write the opinion letter on each item of possible infringement. so that you can get the insurance, so you can get the distribution.
Oh, goodness. That's exactly something that we talked at length about, say a handful of episodes ago. We had filmmaker John Manning on the show, and he happened to do a documentary film that was about burlesque dancing that was happening in Portland, Oregon. And so you can imagine all of the incidental music that's happening all of the time, any sort of performance. And so he had to hire someone to do the exact analysis that you're speaking of. And man, did it sound like a headache for all people involved.
And expensive, I suspect, in terms of
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Tell me again the term that you used for the letter that you write, the letter that okays the use of it.
It's a fair use opinion.
And I wouldn't fair use opinion.
Say it okays it.
Okay.
The opinion
your
letter
opinion, right?
Is a reasoned opinion by a lawyer who's looked at all of the issues. And that is something that the filmmaker would use to get the insurance company to say, okay, we trust and agree with that analysis, and therefore we give you insurance, so that if somebody sues, we can defend the case.
So it's to get the insurance. It's not to get the distribution deal. It's actually to get the insurance that allows you, that helps you with the distribution deal.
Right, and the distribution deal isn't likely to materialize if you can't. I shouldn't say
provide
that. Someone will sign you a distribution deal. It'll be conditioned on your obtaining the E&O, the errors and omissions insurance policy.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a bit about contracts and other legal forms that you're often, I'm sure, are often a big part of probably your daily life, and probably should be a part of our daily lives as documentary filmmakers. What are the most common ones that we should be thinking about?
Well, certainly the release between anybody who's on camera or interviewed. You want to have a document with every member of the crew that specifies that the work they do belongs to the film company or the filmmaker directly as a work made for hire.
Okay, that is absolutely not something that I knew of. That's wild. Okay, so the crew actually needs to do that.
Crew deal memo is what I would call it.
Yeah,
I had to call it crew deal memo. Yeah. I would say that's very important. Obviously, licenses for any music that is being used in the piece.
Yeah.
And any other third-party content that's being used in the piece. I generally say, look, if you've got a more than one or two people who are sort of at the helm of the project, you need to have some kind of a document or agreement between them. If not, I like to say form a company, because that also gives you the opportunity to raise money from outsiders, and it gets more complex. But some kind of a partnership agreement or an LLC or a corporation or something is pretty important. Beyond that, what else? Location releases.
Yeah, of course, location releases. And before we get to that, one of the things that you talked about, releases from people on camera, releases from your crew. What's interesting to me is I've been told by a number of people whose opinion I have greatly respected over the years, and to their knowledge, they said that if a person is interviewed on camera in a documentary, that in itself is consent. That you actually don't necessarily have to have the paperwork. Is that true in any way, Gordon, or is that absolutely ridiculous?
It's not ridiculous. I would say that in the absence of the paper document that specifies the exact nature of the interview and what it can be used for and all those things, having them appearing on camera in front of the camera, they see the lights, the camera, the microphone, and so on. It means they've consented to be interviewed.
Okay.
But unless they specifically tell you on camera in so many words, and you can use it for any purpose you like forever and ever throughout the universe, all the extras, right? So because they could argue, well, yeah, I knew I was being interviewed, but I didn't know it was going to go on television.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know you were going to use these for promotional web spots. Yeah.
Right. So you want to have a document that very clearly states that. And by the way, the consent, in the absence of a document that says the consent is irrevocable, guess what? They can revoke that consent. They could say, you know what? I don't think I like that anymore. Now, generally in the media, it's frowned upon. Nobody's going to do that. If you interview a celebrity, it's going to reflect really badly on that celebrity if they later withdraw the consent, because nobody's going to want to interview them in the future.
Yeah, right.
But for your average Joe who shows up and appears in talking about his brother-in-law who, jumped off a cliff and whatever, they may not care.
Yeah, totally.
You want to interview them ever again. They'd rather just they don't like the way you portrayed them or whatever, and so they get upset. So the written release is really, the best evidence that they did consent to everything and anything, and that's why I prefer it.
Even in the conversation that I've had with you today, and I imagine my listeners, a lot of our gears are working overtime right now with the information that you have given us. And I'm sure to you, you're like, trust me, this is like the tip of the iceberg. This is really basic. But what we have already learned in this episode is, I think, I know it's going to be incredibly valuable to a lot of us. You have legal forms and packs that you have actually put together, and coincidentally enough, you've done it with our friend Faith Fuller and through her desktop documentaries. What are those legal forms and packets that can help make all of this easy for us? Because I definitely would love access to some of this.
Well, we have two packets. One is the sort of production, pre-production and production forms.
Yeah.
That's the releases, the life rights agreement. There's some that stuff in there that you would use sort of on the front end of things, and then we have another packet that's sort of on the back end, the post-production stuff, the music licenses, the releases, clearing content and stuff like that.
Location releases, talent releases, crew releases. That's all in that legal form starter pack, right?
In the starter pack, exactly. And then the post production pack has some of the stuff that you would think about a little later on in the game. Right.
I need to get to these, so these are going to be super helpful for me, and I know that a number of my listeners are probably going to go today and grab these. What's the best way that we can do that?
Okay, well, so I understand that you have an affiliate relationship and a promo code for your audience to use. And what's the promo code?
The promo code that we've been using is MyDocLife, and it's MyDocLife all in caps, and that includes a 25% discount for my listeners.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'm going to create some kind of a bonus. I haven't exactly got in my mind what that bonus will be. Okay. Some kind of an easy download that'll be a resource, a checklist, or maybe I'll do a fair use handy reference guide.
That would be appropriate, yeah.
And so if you go to firemark.com, that's my name, Firemark, firemark.com/documentarylife. And what we'll do is we'll let you sign up to get my bonus, and then we will also provide you with the links and the promo code to get the discount on the forms packs, all sort of one-stop shopping. So you have to follow some links, but right. We'll get that all for you, and that way you can continue to hear from me, and you'll get the forms pack from desktop documentaries.
From desktop documentaries, exactly.
Right. So I'd love to do that, and so the link will be firemark.com/documentarylife.
Awesome. Can we make that firemark.com/thedocumentarylife.com?
Certainly.
And the only reason I say that is just because it could be somewhat confusing, because it is always referred to as the documentary life. So again, that link will be firemark.com/thedocumentarylife. And what I'll do is I'll also include that in the show notes for this episode. So anyone can either go to that URL, or they can go to the documentarylife.com website and just check it out from the show notes. I'll put a link there as well.
Awesome.
Gordon, this is a conversation that I have wanted to have for a long time, and I'm very thankful that I bumped into you, a couple of weeks ago at Podcast Movement.
Feeling is mutual.
And this is definitely a conversation that it's going to be hard for some documentary filmmakers to hear, including myself. Yeah. But it's important, and these are the things that we can be doing, hopefully before an issue comes up. These are things that we can be doing preemptive to protect ourselves, And speaking with someone like yourself, an entertainment lawyer like yourself, is going to be very beneficial to all of us. Thank you so much for being on the show. I anticipate emails from this, and I anticipate further correspondence. It'd be great to have you on again in the future.
That would be my pleasure. And also, let me just say to your listeners, I do have a YouTube channel where I answer, the easy questions, the basic questions.
Awesome. Tell us about that.
Not too specific. So firemark.tv is where I have my asked and answered question and answer series that I try to do almost every week.
Okay.
And if you have questions, go over there or go to firemark.com/questions. Submit your question, and I try to get an answer out to you as soon as I can.
Another outstanding and valuable resource from our friend Gordon Firemark. Awesome, Gordon. Thank you so much, man, for being on the show.
Chris, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me. Be well.
Don't forget, if you're interested in a guide to help you navigate the fundamental aspects of doc filmmaking, the things that every doc filmmaker should know, then get our free doc filmmaking course, The Documentary Filmmaker's Essential Checklist, by going to thedocumentarylife.com/courses. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next episode. Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated, and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.